Egypt is not going to be able to live that way. And they'll end up blowing up the dam. And I said it, and I say it loud and clear. They'll blow up that dam, and they have to do something. So whatever you can do to get them, Ethiopia, to do that, they're going to have to, okay? And we've cut off all payment and everything else to Ethiopia. It was terrible. I say it loud and clear. They'll blow up that dam, and they have to do something. Because they could have stopped it. They should have stopped it long before it was started. I said, how do you let it get built and then you say they have a dam?
Well, Africa's largest hydroelectric project, the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, has been inaugurated. The dam is a massive engineering project that has been under construction for over a decade. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and regional leaders attended the inauguration ceremony. The dam is meant to double Ethiopia's electricity output and help supply power to millions.
What we are essentially doing is to meet our electricity demands from one of the cleanest source of energy. We cannot afford to continue keeping more than 65 million of our people in the dark.
Imagine this, deep in the heart of Africa, as the morning sun rises over the Blue Nile, an unstoppable roar echoes through the valleys. It is not the sound of war, not the sound of protest, but the sound of 13 massive turbines waking up, pumping out power, pumping out freedom. This is Ethiopia's 5 billion message to the world. We will no longer sit in darkness while our rivers feed the world's empire builders. For over a century, African resources have been the hidden engine of the global economy, from our gold to our oil, from our coffee to our diamonds. But the one thing the West never allowed Africa to control was power, electricity, energy, infrastructure, because that is the backbone of real independence. Without power, you cannot build factories, you cannot industrialize, you cannot compete. And so they kept Africa begging for diesel fuel, begging for loans, begging for aid, year after year. But not anymore. Ethiopia has flipped the script and Washington is panicking. This single hydroelectric dam, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, is not just a piece of infrastructure. It is a declaration of war against dependency. It is Africa telling the world, we will power our own cities, we will power our own industries, we will write our own future. And let's be clear, this was not supposed to happen. Western financiers refused to fund this dam. The IMF warned Ethiopia it would never recover the costs. Foreign media mocked it as an impossible dream. Yet the Ethiopian people did the unthinkable. They funded it themselves. Farmers sold cattle to buy bonds. Teachers gave part of their salaries. Even soldiers contributed their wages. This was not just a government project, it was a nationwide rebellion against the global status quo. Washington is terrified because they know what comes next. If Ethiopia proves that an African nation can power its entire economy without foreign control, what will stop Nigeria from doing the same? What will stop Congo from electrifying its mines and becoming the energy hub of Africa? What will stop Angola, Kenya, and Zambia from telling the West, no more begging, we've got this? You see, this dam does not just produce electricity, it produces confidence, and confidence is contagious. Across Africa, leaders are visiting Addis Ababa to see the dam with their own eyes. They are returning home with one question, burning in their minds: if Ethiopia can do it, why can't we? But here is why the US is really worried. Power means leverage. For decades, Washington, you stayed as a tool of control, do what we say, or we cut the funding. Now, Ethiopia will no longer bow to such threats. It will no longer be forced to choose between development and dignity. Instead, Ethiopia can sell power to its neighbors, collect billions in revenue, and reinvest in its own people without signing a single IMF loan agreement. And the symbolism of this dam could not be more powerful. Imagine a continent that has been told for centuries it cannot rise suddenly turning on the lights for millions. Imagine African factories running day and night, producing goods not just for export but for African markets. Imagine millions of young people staying home because there are jobs, opportunities, and hope. That is what terrifies Washington: a strong, united, electrified Africa. Make no mistake, this is not just about Ethiopia. This is a continental turning point. If Ethiopia wins this battle, Africa wins. If Ethiopia stands firm, the entire global South gains courage to challenge the old world order. This dam is not just a construction project, it is a warning shot to those who believe Africa's destiny must be written in foreign capitals. So buckle up, because what we are witnessing is nothing short of historic. This is the moment Africa stops asking permission. This is the moment the balance of power begins to shift. And for the first time in a long time, the rest of the world is not laughing, they are watching nervously, wondering how to stop the unstoppable. Brothers and sisters, patriots of Africa, and citizens of the world, today we stand on the banks of the Blue Nile and witness history in motion. A new dawn has broken over the Horn of Africa. a dawn not painted by foreign hands but by the ingenuity, the sweat, and the determination of Africans themselves. Ethiopia's $5 billion hydroelectric dam project, once ridiculed, resisted, and sabotaged, now roars to life, sending shockwaves through the global order and shattering centuries of imposed dependency. For decades, Africa was told that we could not build for ourselves, that we could not fund our own mega projects, that we had to beg for loans, kneel for aid, and dance to the tune of distant powers who decided what was appropriate for African development. But Ethiopia has proven them wrong. This dam is not just a wall of concrete, it is a wall against exploitation, against interference, against the chains that kept African nations hostage to foreign energy grids and foreign dictates. The United States is worried, and they have every reason to be. For decades, Washington wielded soft power through the IMF, the World Bank, and USAID, deciding which African country could light up its homes and which would remain in the dark. Electricity was not just a commodity. It was a tool of leverage. A nation in darkness is a nation under control. A nation without power is a nation that cannot industrialize, cannot negotiate, cannot rise. Ethiopia just broke that cycle. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, worth over $5 billion, is not merely a source of electricity. It is a symbol of sovereignty. For the first time, over 60% of Ethiopia's population will have reliable access to power. Farmers will pump water without relying on seasonal rains. Factories will hum late into the night. Schools and hospitals will run without interruption. This is economic liberation, and that liberation terrifies those who profited from Africa's dependency. Make no mistake, this project faced resistance at every turn. From foreign lobbying efforts trying to block funding, to covert diplomatic pressure aimed at stalling construction, to media campaigns warning of regional instability and environmental concerns, the full weight of Western influence was deployed to keep this dam from becoming reality. Why? Because they knew that a self-sufficient Ethiopia would inspire the rest of Africa to take control of its resources, its rivers, its future. The U.S. State Department, time and again, framed this project as a threat to regional stability. They claimed it endangered peace with downstream countries. But let us be honest, when was the last time Washington lost sleep over African peace? Their real concern was losing the ability to pressure Ethiopia with energy aid, losing contracts for foreign energy firms, and losing leverage over the Horn of Africa, a geostrategic corridor that connects the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Indian Ocean. This dam is a declaration. Africa will no longer be starved of power to keep it weak. This dam is a rallying cry. If Ethiopia can mobilize resources, overcome sanctions, and fund its own future, then so can Ghana, Nigeria, Mali, and every other nation still waiting for permission to rise. Consider the numbers: over 5,000 megawatts of power will soon flow from this colossal project. Enough to power not just Ethiopia but to export surplus electricity to neighbors like Sudan, Djibouti, Kenya, and even Egypt. This is continental integration in action. This is Pan-Africanism in concrete and steel. For every kilowatt exported, Ethiopia earns revenue, builds wealth, and strengthens its bargaining power on the international stage. And what does Washington fear most? That this new wealth will not flow back to Wall Street or to European banks, but will stay right here in Africa. For the first time in a long time, the financial winners are African engineers, African workers, and African communities. This project also represents a massive psychological shift. For years, the West used debt traps. As a weapon, they would offer loans with harsh conditions, then control national budgets through economic reforms. Ethiopia, by mobilizing internal resources, diaspora bonds, and partnerships outside Western control, proved that there is another way. This dam was largely funded by Ethiopians themselves: teachers, taxi drivers, farmers who contributed from their own salaries to make it a reality. When a nation funds its own project, no foreign government can dictate its terms. But Ethiopia's success is not just an Ethiopian story, it is an African blueprint. Imagine a continent where every major river is harnessed not for foreign companies, but for African industry. Imagine Africa becoming a net exporter of energy, lighting up its own cities while selling power to Europe and Asia. This is the future that terrifies Washington because it means Africa no longer has to beg for investment. The power is literally in our hands. Even now, American analysts are warning that the dam will shift the balance of power in the region. Of course it will. A powerless continent was always easy to manipulate. A continent with electricity, with industries, with its own economic engine, is a continent that can no longer be controlled through threats of sanctions or withheld aid. And Ethiopia is not alone. Across Africa, similar projects are rising. From Inga 3 in the Democratic Republic of Congo to new solar mega-farms in Morocco, to natural gas plants in Tanzania, a silent revolution is taking place. Each project adds to Africa's independence, and each project reduces the West's leverage. But Ethiopia's dam stands out because of its timing. It comes at a moment when the global order is shifting, when Africa is negotiating from a position of new strength, when Western influence is waning, and Washington knows that if this project succeeds, if Ethiopia becomes a regional powerhouse, it could inspire a cascade of similar moves across the continent. They are worried not just about electricity, they are worried about the ideas this dam represents. Ideas are dangerous to those who rely on control. The idea that Africa can fund its own infrastructure. The idea that Africa can break from dependency. The idea that Africa does not need to obey outdated aid conditionalities. This is why the pressure campaigns are intensifying. This is why there are whispers of sanctions, of human rights concerns, of democratic backsliding. It is all a cover for economic fear that Africa will no longer be open for exploitation. Ethiopia's government, for its part, has made it clear. The dam is non-negotiable. It is a matter of survival, of sovereignty, of dignity. And the people have rallied behind it in a way that no foreign lobby can break. Millions celebrated. As the final turbines were installed, flags waved not just in Addis Ababa but across the region, because this victory belongs to all of Africa. So tonight, let us honor not just the engineers and workers who built this project, but the spirit of defiance that made it possible. Let us send a message to Washington, to Brussels, to every capital that once dictated Africa's future. Those days are over. This dam is not just a project, it is a promise. A promise that Africa will rise, that Africa will build, that Africa will light up its own future. The roar of the turbines is not just the sound of power generation. It is the sound of freedom ringing across the continent, and that freedom is infectious. Already, neighboring countries are talking about building their own projects, launching their own energy revolutions, refusing to stay in the dark while their natural wealth powers industries abroad. Washington is in a panic because energy was their last weapon. For years, they used oil and gas markets to dictate prices and policies. They controlled access to capital for power projects. They even used climate agreements as bargaining chips to keep Africa in a state of dependence. But the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam changes that balance forever. Let us take a closer look at what this means for Ethiopia and Africa at large. First, industrialization is about to accelerate. For decades, Africa's challenge was not just raw material extraction, it was value addition. We exported raw coffee beans, raw minerals, raw cotton, while importing finished goods at triple the price. Without cheap, reliable energy, building large-scale factories was nearly impossible. Now, Ethiopia can power entire industrial zones. Leather processing, textile manufacturing, steel smelting, all can now be done domestically. And that means jobs, millions of jobs for young Africans who were once told their only chance at survival was to migrate. Second, regional influence is shifting. For decades, Egypt was seen as the dominant power of the Nile Basin because of its control over downstream water access. That power dynamic is now reversed. Ethiopia sits at the headwaters and has just claimed its right to use its resources for its people. The message is clear. Africa will no longer allow colonial-era treaties to dictate modern development. Washington is uneasy because this move strengthens a bloc of independent African nations. They fear a Horn of Africa that can negotiate with China, Russia, India, and even the Gulf states on equal footing. They fear that with energy independence, Africa can reject predatory trade deals. They fear that with rising prosperity, African nations will no longer tolerate one-sided partnerships. And so, we see the backlash. Think tanks in Washington are publishing reports painting Ethiopia as a destabilizing actor. Newspapers are warning of a looming water war. Western diplomats are quietly lobbying for international oversight of the dam's operations as if Africans are children who cannot manage their own infrastructure. They talk of mediation, but what they really mean is control. But here is the truth. Ethiopia does not need permission to develop. Africa does not need a foreign stamp of approval to feed, clothe, and power its people. And every African who hears my voice must understand this is bigger than Ethiopia. This is about setting a precedent. If Ethiopia folds under pressure, it tells the world that Africa is still weak, still open for manipulation. But if Ethiopia stands firm, it tells the world that a new era has begun. This dam will also change Africa's financial future. Revenue from electricity exports will bring in billions annually. Those funds can be reinvested into education, healthcare, and infrastructure. For too long, Africa's development budget has been dictated by external donors with strings attached. Now, Ethiopia will write its own development agenda. This is what sovereignty looks like, and it is beautiful. It is no surprise that American corporations are worried. When a country develops its own energy supply, it no longer needs to import expensive diesel generators or rely on foreign contractors to run its grids. Local companies rise, local engineers innovate, and the profits stay home. Washington fears losing those lucrative contracts and, more importantly, losing strategic leverage. Let us not forget the symbolic power of this achievement. Every African child who sees that dam will know that greatness is possible. Every African leader who visits the site will be forced to ask why their own rivers still run wild, while their people sit in darkness. Ethiopia has thrown down the gauntlet. Who will be next? Imagine if Nigeria fully harnessed its rivers. Imagine if Congo completed Inga 3 and turned Central Africa into the energy capital of the world. Imagine if Zambia, Angola, and Mozambique coordinated a continental power grid, selling electricity from Cape Town to Cairo. That is not a dream, that is the logical next step. And to those who say Africa cannot afford it, Ethiopia has already answered. We will build with our own hands, fund with our own money, and rally our own people. When foreign banks refused to lend, Ethiopians bought bonds with their salaries. Farmers, teachers, soldiers, they all became investors. That is why this project is more than steel and turbines. It is a people's victory. The United States must come to terms with this new reality. Africa is not a charity case. Africa is not a pawn in great power competition. Africa is a rising giant that will no longer ask for permission to rise. Those who want to partner with Africa must do so on equal terms. Those who come with neo-colonial schemes will find themselves shut out. The conclusion is clear. Ethiopia's $5 billion dam is a turning point, not just for one country but for an entire continent. It represents the moment Africa stopped waiting for the world's approval. It represents the moment we chose self-reliance over dependency, dignity over handouts, power over powerlessness. Let Washington worry. Let Brussels panic. Let the old powers write as many reports as they like. The turbines are spinning. The lights are turning on. The future has already begun. This is not the last time Africa will shock the world. This is not the last time Africa will break the chains of dependency. The dam is just the first chapter in a much bigger story, the story of a continent that refuses to be kept in the dark any longer. And when history is written, they will say that on the banks of the Nile a nation dared to dream, dared to build, dared to defy, and in doing so lit up not just its own cities but the path for all of Africa to follow.